Days slipped into weeks. We formed habits we'd never bothered with. Sunday video calls, swapping bad memes, trading recipes. He started baking bread, his idea of conquering flames in a safer medium, and proudly sent me photos of each imperfect loaf. One evening he called, voice unsteady. His colleague from the construction company had suffered a heart attack on site. "Makes you think," he said, "how fast things go up in smoke." That phrase landed heavy inside me. He wasn't just talking about health. He was revisiting that day, the fire, all our brittleness. I stayed on the phone longer than usual, talking about anything that felt alive. The sound of coffee brewing, the ridiculous pigeons on my windowsill. By autumn, I had almost convinced myself the incident had fully transformed from trauma to folklore. Then came the smoke alarm text, a photo of the living room ceiling missing a small patch of paint. "Mom tried a new incense blend," he wrote. "Apparently it smells like forest blaze." Accurate. I rushed down for the weekend, half worried, half amused. The house was intact, though slightly perfumed with woody regret. Over tea, Mom suddenly asked, "Do you know what your father told the insurance agent after your fire?" I shook my head. He said no damage to the most important thing, our sense of humor. Then he laughed until the man hung up. Something in that detail unclenched a knot I hadn't known I carried. The fire hadn't simply embarrassed our family. It had startled us awake. We'd been gliding on autopilot, polite and distant. The shock rewired us. When Dad suggested we both take a weekend cooking class to conquer our nemesis, the stove, I accepted instantly. The community center kitchen buzzed with chatter and steam. Our instructor, a patient woman named Ava, handed us aprons and immediately made everyone introduce themselves. "Hi, I'm Lena," I said. I once burned an actual kitchen, so tonight's goal is redemption. Laughter rippled through the group, and I caught Dad's proud smirk. "And I'm Oscar, her father, designated extinguisher operator." We chopped onions, learned sauté techniques, and most importantly, not once did anything ignite except laughter. By the final session, we'd mastered a half-decent risotto. As we scraped plates clean, Ava said, "Cooking can't just be about control. It's also about trust. You trust heat not to betray you, and trust yourself not to panic when it does." The sentence felt custom-made for me. Driving home that night, I watched the headlights glide over familiar streets and realized my prank had accidentally given me a philosophy. Life will catch fire sometimes, but panic isn't the only response. Sometimes you grab an extinguisher, sometimes you just breathe and let the moment complete its burn. Back at the house, the kitchen lights glowed over spotless counters. Dad poured 2 glasses of orange juice, ceremonially clinked them together, and said, "2 controlled burns and second chances." We laughed and drank, the citrus tang sharp and forgiving. I glanced at the wall that had once been black with soot. "You can still see a faint shadow if you stand just right," I said. "I left it on purpose," he admitted. "A reminder that mess can be beautiful once you've cleaned it yourself." In the months that followed, whenever I visited, there were small tokens of that lesson everywhere. A recipe card with tiny scorch marks pinned to the fridge, a framed photograph of the charity fair, even a miniature extinguisher keychain hanging from Mom's spice rack. We had turned accident into language, clumsiness into charm. One Sunday evening, Dad took me to the backyard where he'd set up a small fire pit he called the Safe Flame. We roasted marshmallows while the sunset dripped crimson behind the trees. "You know," he said, spearing another marshmallow, "that fire scared years off me, but it also burnt away nonsense. After that, I stopped worrying about being the kind of father who fixes everything." He looked at the glowing coals. "Turns out, you fix yourself just fine." I wanted to tease him, make light, but my throat tightened. Instead, I toasted my marshmallow too long until it caught fire, held it up and said, "Old habits." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his stick, then blew mine out for me, still chuckling. Later, when the stars came out and the embers cooled to dull orange, I realized we'd completed some invisible circle. I had once tried to spark laughter and ended in flames. He had once built walls of caution and ended laughing. Now we shared a quiet warmth that required no prank, no apology, just presence. That was the start of how the kitchen fire turned into something larger, the story of how a daughter and her father learned to be human again, messy, ridiculous, and real. And though neither of us knew it then, another turn of chaos was waiting around February, a surprise that would test this new closeness in ways we couldn't imagine. But that's where the next part begins. When February finally arrived, the air in our little Connecticut town changed texture. It carried that faint metallic chill that warns you spring is still negotiating its contract. The warmth inside our newly peaceful household felt almost fragile, as if one wrong spark could tip it back toward silence. I'd been back in my apartment for a few months, wrapped up in winter projects, texting Dad every few days with small victories from work. Then one Saturday morning, he called, voice shaky in a way that yanked a thread straight through my chest. "The stove," he said, "it's acting weird again. Might be nothing, but could you come down?" Before I even waited to think about schedules, 2 hours later I was at the doorstep with coffee, half expecting plumes of smoke to pour out dramatically. Instead, Dad greeted me with an apologetic grin and a kitchen perfectly intact. "False alarm," he admitted. "But hey, you looked worried. Proves you've learned something." I smacked his shoulder with mock indignation, but truthfully, the small panic had shown me just how much those earlier flames still lived quietly inside our nerves. The rest of the day, we spent inspecting wiring, checking vents, pretending we were professional house inspectors. Somewhere between tightening screws and debating whether to replace the oven, laughter slipped easily again. It wasn't childish this time. It was relaxed, grounded. When we broke for lunch, eating grilled cheese over the spotless counter, Dad said, "You know that prank of yours keeps getting more expensive." I replaced that hood twice already. I groaned dramatically and promised to make a reimbursement plan that would only take me until age 50. He chuckled, then his tone softened. "But it gave me you back, Lena. I didn't realize how far apart we drifted." Sometimes affection, when admitted aloud, crackles louder than any flame. I just nodded, chewing bread, afraid that saying anything might tip the moment out of balance. That night we went to an old movie screening downtown. The heater in the hall barely worked, so everyone sat wrapped in coats. During one scene, something ridiculously glamorous about a woman torchlighting her cigar. Dad leaned toward me and whispered, "She should use ketchup instead." I snorted so hard people turned around. Embarrassment melted quickly into amusement. He clearly reveled in our private mythology. Over the next weeks, our phone calls turned into a routine, small updates spiced with jokes about smoke detectors. But underneath them, I started noticing things. He got breathless climbing stairs, forgot words mid-sentence. When I asked, he brushed it off as winter laziness. The first time he coughed for an entire minute on a video call, I felt that strange, powerless heat of worry return. Fire, again, in a different form. By March, I insisted on visiting more often. The kitchen smelled perpetually of lemon cleaner and baked bread, a comfort smell now. Yet Dad moved slower, hid fatigue behind humor. One Sunday evening, during a quiet dinner, he suddenly said, "It scares me sometimes that you might think of me only as the punchline in that story. I'd rather be the reason you kept laughing afterward." I put down my fork. "You're the reason I stopped being afraid of laughing," I said, surprised by the truth in my voice. He smiled, reached for his glass, and that simple exchange became our truce against whatever storms waited. A week later, the storm arrived. Mom called early morning. He'd collapsed in the garage. My drive down blurred into a single streak of gray road. The hospital smelled sterile, too much like the memory of smoke extinguishers. He was conscious, pale, hooked to monitors that blinked like gentle warning lights. "Minor heart attack," the doctor said, "and a solid recovery ahead if he finally listens." When I finally sat beside him, he tried to joke. Told you the kitchen wasn't done teaching lessons. I laughed through tears and promised I'd handle all cooking in his absence. But that night, alone in the visitors' lounge, I thought about how every story we'd built had been wrapped in mirth to keep fear at bay. What had started as a prank had somehow become the emblem of our resilience. Now it would have to carry us through this new trial. But recovery was slow but determined, much like his attitude about everything. Physical therapy, diet reform, extra naps. It all unfolded under Mom's watchful glare. Eager to distract him, I proposed a project. Turning the old garage into a woodworking studio. Safer than fire, I said, unless you decide to weld. For once, he agreed without sarcasm. We cleaned, painted, built shelves. Every hammer's thud felt like punctuation in a paragraph neither of us wanted to end. During those weeks, he told me stories I'd never heard. The time he nearly burned his eyebrows fixing a carburetor, the moment he first met Mom at a hardware store, 'cause of course. Each confession peeled back layers of the stoic man I'd spent years tiptoeing around. I realized our family's language had always been practical advice wrapped over unspoken love. The fire, the fear, and this fragile healing had simply stripped the words of their armor. One breezy Sunday, when he could finally walk without fatigue, we celebrated by cooking together again. I insisted on making something elaborate, vegetarian lasagna, heavy with symbolism and mozzarella. As we layered pasta sheets, Dad said casually, "You know, Lena, I used to think safety meant silence, that if nothing big happened, we were fine. But you and your fiery chaos taught me that noise isn't always danger. Sometimes it's life showing off." When the oven timer beeped, even I felt a flicker of nerves. We both stepped back dramatically, as if observing a live volcano, then laughed until tears glistened. The lasagna came out perfect, golden browned edges, not a hint of smoke. "A redemption arc," he proclaimed, cutting the first slice with unnecessary ceremony. Months later, he returned fully to work, albeit part-time. Claiming retirement felt like overcooking. The house remained our shrine of cautious joy. He still teased me about installing a sprinkler system just for me, and I still pretended to consider it. We'd talk late into nights about anything, music, neighbors, absurd TV cooking competitions, until Mom scolded us for noise pollution. It became another ritual, a gentle defiance against all the versions of ourselves that once stayed too quiet. One evening, nearly a year after the fire, I visited alone. They'd gone out to dinner with friends, and I wandered into the kitchen to pour water. The silence there hummed softly. In the right light, the faintest trace of discoloration still shadowed the corner above the stove. I reached out, fingertips brushing the wall, and whispered a thank you, something I'd never said aloud. Because that tiny scar carried everything, our foolishness, our laughter, our recovery. It reminded me that destruction and creation often borrow the same spark. When they came home, Dad noticed my hands still hovering near the wall. "Still forgiving yourself?" he teased. I smiled. "Always," I said. His reply was simple. "Me too." We stood there, the three of us framed by light that flickered warm but steady. Later, before leaving, I scrawled a small note on a sticky pad and left it under the fridge magnet shaped like a fire engine. It read, "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to turn a mess into a memory." I imagined him finding it in the morning, groaning at the sentimentality, maybe smiling before making his usual terrible toast. Driving back through the sleepy streets, I caught sight of faint smoke curling from a neighbor's chimney, peaceful and slow. For the first time, that sight didn't trigger fear. It looked almost beautiful, proof that fire could belong in a home without destroying it. Somewhere deep in my chest, warmth spread, tender and steady. So now whenever someone asks about the infamous kitchen story, I tell them the short version. I tried to prank my dad, but ended up burning the kitchen. What I never add, but what I always think, is that I also learned how love, once set ablaze, doesn't turn to ash. It turns to light, it softens walls, and it teaches even the most careful hearts to laugh again in the flicker of their own mistakes.